There are places where you can pass through an airport in just a few seconds, where your face is scanned faster than a blink of an eye. There are cities where trains slice straight through buildings that people actually live in, where the idea of a first floor or a 22nd floor becomes nothing more than a number on a sign. From the outside, it looks like the future America once imagined when it dreamed about speed, efficiency, and absolute order. But if you slow down just a little, if you step out of the rhythm the system demands, you begin to notice what never appears on travel brochures: cramped spaces buried underground, lives compressed to fit the pace of relentless growth, choices people are forced to accept when the city lights shine too brightly. But not evenly for everyone. The question is not how modern this place is, the real question is what the true cost of that modernity is, and who is paying it in silence. To understand why these paradoxes exist, we have to go back to how this country transformed itself in just a few decades. This was not a slow evolution like the one many Western societies experienced. It was a historical acceleration. Hundreds of millions of people left rural areas in a period shorter than a single generation. Cities expanded so fast that they became living organisms, constantly demanding more space, more energy, and more people just to keep breathing. In that process, efficiency rose to the highest value. Everything was measured by speed and smooth operation. Airports had to be faster, transportation had to be smarter, human movement had to be organized, directed, and controlled so the larger machine would not slow down. Order was no longer a choice. It became a condition for survival. The only way the system could avoid collapsing under its own weight. But when a society places efficiency above all else, a deeper question emerges. What happens to those who cannot keep up? Migrant workers without urban registration. Young people who arrive in the city with dreams of a better life, yet can only afford a space just big enough to lie down. Elderly people left behind in a structure where everything points toward the future, while the past is treated as a burden. The modernity the world sees is built on these quiet compromises. Not everyone stands in the light. Not every story is told. And not every choice is truly voluntary. When speed becomes the standard, people either adapt, or they are compressed into the blind spots the system has no time to notice. It is from these blind spots that the less visible sides of life begin to take shape. Not loud, not official, but large enough to become an inseparable part of the full picture. Step into these megacities and the first thing that overwhelms outsiders is not just the scale, but the sense that everything is moving faster than people themselves. Here, the city does not wait for you to adapt. You adjust, or you fall behind. Subway lines cut straight through dense blocks of housing. Residential spaces are stacked in ways that defy intuition. All of it is a reminder that space has become the rarest resource of all. In the central districts, the surface of the city is carefully polished. Lights, screens, signs, and crowds move with a precision that feels almost cold. But take one step off the main routes and another layer of the city reveals itself. Narrower corridors, lower ceilings, dimmer light, rooms divided until every square meter has a price. This is not an exception. This is how millions of people live, work, and exist in silence. For many migrant workers, the city is the only path forward, but it is also a place that forces them to accept living conditions that would be considered unacceptable elsewhere, not because they do not understand the cost, but because they have no better option. Between soaring rent and unstable income, compressed living space becomes a mandatory trade-off. That crowding is not only physical, it shapes how people think, behave, and make decisions. When life is compressed, everything revolves around short-term survival. Long-term dreams begin to feel like a luxury. Moral and social boundaries start to blur, and in those narrow gaps, other forms of existence, sometimes controversial, begin to emerge as a natural human response to sustained pressure. When survival pressure lasts long enough, societies begin to create self-adjusting mechanisms that are rarely named out loud. These are not decisions written into policy or designed on paper. They are responses born from deeply human needs. When living space shrinks and formal opportunities grow scarce, people are forced to search for paths that exist outside the familiar line of sight. At the lowest levels of the city, both literally and metaphorically, a parallel world takes shape. Quiet, unofficial, but persistent. It is where unwritten agreements are made, where work that never appears in official statistics still manages to sustain millions of lives. To outsiders, these realities can feel shocking or uncomfortable. To those living inside them, they are simply a way to make it through one more day. What unsettles many Western viewers is not the existence of these phenomena, but how normalized they have become. When pressure turns into a permanent condition, the line between temporary and permanent disappears. What was once an exception slowly becomes part of an unspoken order. No one celebrates it, but few have the space, energy, or security to truly question it. More importantly, these choices rarely come from desire. They come from the absence of better alternatives. When the formal system is too rigid to absorb everyone, what spills over is forced to adapt on its own. And that adaptation, however controversial, reflects a basic truth. Human beings will always find a way to survive, even if the price is living in the gray zones society prefers not to see. This is not a story about right or wrong, it is a story about pressure, about the limits of systems, and about what happens when the speed of progress moves faster than our ability to care for the people caught inside it. But if we stop only at those darker corners, the picture remains incomplete, because alongside pressure and quiet compromises, this society also creates ways for people to save themselves, not by escaping the city, but by reclaiming their sense of being human within it. Between concrete towers and relentless speed, culture becomes a release valve, a form of emotional shelter. Food is the clearest example. It is not just about eating. It is about control. Small food stalls squeezed into narrow alleys, makeshift kitchens that never let the fire go out, dishes that feel strange to outsiders but taste like home to those who grew up with them. For a few brief minutes, people are no longer anonymous parts of a massive machine. They become individuals again, carrying memories, habits, and familiar comfort, further away from the urban core. There are still communities moving at a different rhythm. Slower, less optimized, less obsessed with metrics. In these places, relationships matter more than speed. Tradition is not treated as an obstacle, but as a stabilizer against relentless modernization. For many, this is not backwardness. It is a conscious choice not to be completely swept away. This coexistence is what creates the deepest paradox. On one side, extreme modernity. On the other, quiet, persistent efforts to preserve identity. On one side, massive systems. On the other, small individuals trying not to disappear inside them. And perhaps this is not just the story of one country. It reflects a larger question facing every society that is accelerating forward. As we race toward the future, how much are we willing to trade, so that we do not lose ourselves along the way? When you look back at the full picture, what lingers is not the shocking images or the massive numbers, but a feeling that is unsettlingly familiar. Because what is happening here is not completely foreign to the United States, or to any modern society. Housing pressure, rising living costs, an ever faster pace of life, and the sense of being left behind by the system are experiences shared by millions of people around the world. The difference is not the problem itself, but the speed and scale at which it unfolds, and speed changes everything. When change moves too fast, the systems meant to protect people fail to keep up, or are pushed aside. Hard choices appear sooner, more clearly, and often more brutally. That is why this story matters, not as a judgment of one country, but as an early warning about the direction many modern societies are heading. The real danger is not that these darker realities exist. It is that we grow used to them. When overcrowding becomes normal, when pressure is accepted as the unavoidable cost of progress, the boundary of what we consider acceptable slowly shifts. What feels controversial today can quietly become tomorrow's standard, simply because no other option is left on the table. So the question is not who is right or wrong, or which model is superior. The question is whether we are aware enough to see the whole picture before we are pulled too far into a single path of development. Whether we are willing to slow down and adjust, or whether we will keep running faster, hoping the system will somehow fix itself along the way. This story does not ask you to believe, it only asks you to observe, compare, and ask yourself where you stand in this accelerating world. And perhaps the most important moment in this story is not found in giant cities or growth statistics, but in how we respond when faced with uncomfortable realities. History shows that societies rarely collapse from a lack of progress. They collapse when they lose the ability to self-correct. When warning signals are ignored simply because they are inconvenient to hear. What deserves real reflection is that the pressures described here do not appear by accident. They are the logical result of policy choices, of prioritizing efficiency over people, and of the belief that growth alone will solve every other problem. In the short term, that approach delivers impressive achievements. Over time, it builds tensions that no system can absorb forever. For an American audience, this story may feel both distant and familiar. Distant in scale, in concentration of power, in the speed of transformation, but familiar in its core questions. Who benefits most from acceleration? Who pays its hidden costs? And whether we are quietly repeating patterns we once criticized elsewhere. The climax of this story is not an explosive event. It is a quiet realization that no development model is neutral. Every choice creates winners and leaves others behind. And how a society treats those at the margins reveals more than any slogan or GDP figure ever could. The final question does not point outward. It turns back to us. When faced with speed, efficiency, and convenience, how much space are we willing to give up for human beings? And if we do not ask that, if there is one thing worth holding on to after all these fragments come together, it is not the shocking images or the initial sense of awe. It is perspective. Because once curiosity fades, this story is no longer about a single country. It becomes about a broader trend shaping the modern world. A trend that places speed, control, and efficiency at the center, while pushing human fragility to the margins of the conversation. Today's world is more tightly connected than ever. Development models no longer stay within national borders. They are observed, copied, modified, and exported. What happens in one place can become a template somewhere else far faster than we expect. That is why facing the downsides honestly is not an act of criticism, but a necessary step to avoid repeating the same mistakes. There is a paradox worth sitting with. The strongest societies often believe they are capable of controlling the consequences of their choices. History rarely agrees. Complex systems, when pushed to their limits, tend to react in the most unpredictable ways. What is praised as a solution today can quietly become a much bigger problem tomorrow, for each individual. This raises a quiet but persistent question. What are we trading away in exchange for everyday convenience? And are those trade-offs truly chosen freely? Or are they simply the result of having no clearer alternatives left? This story does not end with advice or a final conclusion. It leaves an invitation instead. An invitation to look more slowly, more deeply, and with just enough skepticism toward what is labeled as progress. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing is not change itself, but change that no one questions anymore. And here, the story closes not with a rigid conclusion, but with a necessary pause. Because what has been told is not meant to convince you to adopt a single viewpoint. It is meant to open a space for reflection. In a world where everything is packaged into short headlines and ready-made conclusions, simply stopping to ask questions may have become a rare act. What is striking is that the unease this story creates does not come from something foreign. It comes from something familiar. The pressures, the hard choices, the quiet compromises are not unique to any one society. They are signs of a stage of development that many countries are entering, each in its own way and at its own speed. Recognizing that helps us avoid the easy trap of judging from the outside, so the question shifts from them to us. If we were placed in similar conditions, what would we choose? When living costs rise faster than income, when personal space shrinks, when systems move too fast to truly hear each individual, where is the line we are willing to accept? And where is the point at which we say it is time to slow down and adjust? There is no universal answer to these questions. Each society, each community, and each person will answer differently. shaped by their values and experiences. But asking the questions early is always better than paying the price later. If these thoughts feel worth exploring further, let the conversation continue beyond this moment. Not through blind belief or instant agreement, but through careful observation and honest discussion. Because history rarely changes in moments of noise. It usually shifts direction in the quiet moments when people begin to think differently. This final part does not exist to close the story in the usual way. It exists to open a new cycle of thought, one that extends beyond this video. Because what we have just explored is not a report, and it is not a verdict. It is a cross-section. And what that cross-section reveals is not how different modern societies are, but how similar they are slowly becoming. As technology advances and systems grow more optimized, we face a familiar paradox. We are served faster, more conveniently, more precisely. Yet at the same time, we are more easily absorbed into structures where individuals become small, interchangeable, and easy to replace. The question is not whether progress should be rejected. The question is who is designing that progress, and who it is designed to serve first. History shows that the most resilient societies are not the ones that move the fastest, but the ones that know when to pause and recalibrate. They notice small warning signs before they harden into major crises. They listen to the quiet voices before those voices disappear into dangerous silence. If you have stayed until this moment, you may already feel that this story is not really about a distant country. It is a mirror reflecting choices that many societies, including your own, are already making or will soon be forced to make. Convenience, speed, and efficiency are powerful temptations, but their cost is rarely listed up front. So instead of asking which model is right or wrong, try asking a different question. When faced with those hard choices, do you want to live in a society that functions perfectly on paper, or one that still leaves enough room for human beings to exist without being pushed into silence? Whatever your answer is, it will say a great deal about the future we are building together.